You think it's just a nightmare? Think again. History is filled with kings and prophets who ignored the whispers in the dark, only to lose everything at dawn. When God wants your attention, He doesn't always send a shout. He sends a dream. This is the story of a man who almost slept through his own salvation. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Elias Thorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his 42nd floor office, watching the city blur behind the downpour. At 45, Elias was the youngest partner at Sterling and Finch Architects. He wore Italian suits, drove a German car, and hadn't prayed in 6 years. On the drafting table behind him lay the blueprints for The Apex, a contentious billion-dollar casino project set to revitalize the waterfront. It was Elias's magnum opus. It was also the reason he hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night for a month. The phone on his desk buzzed. It was Julian, the firm's senior partner. The permits cleared, Elias. Julian's voice was smooth like expensive scotch. The heritage site is officially condemned. Bulldozers roll on Monday. You're going to be a legend. Great, Elias said, his voice hollow. Monday. He hung up. The heritage site was an old mission church and a homeless shelter. Elias had convinced the city council the foundation was unstable. It was a lie, a calculated architectural lie to clear the land for the Apex. That night, Elias went home to an empty house. His wife, Clara, had taken their daughter, Sophie, to her mother's house 3 days ago. "I don't know who you are anymore, Eli," she had said, packing a suitcase. "You look at people and see square footage." He poured a drink, swallowed a sleeping pill, and collapsed into bed. That was when the first pattern began, the warning dream. Elias was standing in the lobby of the Apex. It was finished, and it was magnificent. Marble floors, gold chandeliers, the hum of slot machines. But the air was wrong. It smelled of sulfur and wet earth. Suddenly the marble beneath his feet cracked. Not a fracture, but a scream of stone. He looked down and saw that the floor wasn't marble, it was ice. Thin, fragile ice over a black, churning ocean. He tried to run toward the exit, but the revolving doors were locked. Crowds of people, faceless, laughing people, were dancing on the ice. He screamed at them to stop, but no sound came out of his throat. Then the foundation gave way. The casino didn't fall down, it was swallowed whole. As Elias fell into the freezing darkness, he looked up and saw the sky. It wasn't the sky over Seattle. It was a ceiling of stone, sealing him in. He wasn't falling. He was being buried. Elias woke up gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He sat up, drenched in sweat, the smell of sulfur still lingering in his nose. The room was freezing, even though the thermostat read 70 degrees. He tried to shake it off. Stress, he told himself. Just stress. But the next night, the dream changed. He wasn't falling this time. He was watching. This introduced the second pattern, the recurring biblical symbol. He was walking through the construction site of the Apex, but it wasn't a construction site anymore. It was a vineyard. But the vines were withered, grey and brittle. In the center of the dead vineyard stood a large fig tree. It was lush, green, and beautiful from a distance. Elias felt drawn to it. He wanted to eat from it, but as he got closer, he saw there was no fruit, not a single fig. As he reached out to touch a leaf, the tree withered instantly, turning to ash in his hand. Then he saw a wolf, a massive grey wolf watching him from the edge of the vineyard. It didn't growl. It just watched him with sad, human eyes. Elias woke up at 3 a.m. sharp. He grabbed his phone and, against his better judgment, Googled "dream of fig tree with no fruit." The search results hit him like a physical blow. Luke 13, 6, 9. The parable of the barren fig tree, a warning of judgment for failing to produce spiritual fruit, a call to repentance before it is too late. Coincidence? Elias whispered to the dark room, but his hands were trembling. The next morning, things at the office went wrong. The structural engineer, a quiet man named Marcus, came into Elias's office looking pale. "There's water in the soil samples, Elias," Marcus said, laying a report on the desk. "Deep groundwater. If we dig for the parking garage, we might hit an aquifer. The foundation could shift." "We checked that," Elias snapped, his fuse short. "The samples were clean." "These are new samples," Marcus insisted, "from the north quadrant, where the old church foundation is." Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. The ice, he thought. The black ocean beneath the floor. "Ignore it," Elias said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Pour extra concrete. We can't delay." "Monday, Marcus." Marcus looked at him, disappointed. "It's dangerous, Eli." "Do your job." Elias dismissed him. That afternoon, Elias drove by the site. The old mission church stood sad and lonely against the grey sky. He saw a man standing by the chain-link fence, an old man in a tattered coat holding a cardboard sign. Elias slowed his car. The sign didn't ask for money. It read, "The walls will cry out." Elias slammed on the gas, speeding away. He felt hunted, not by the old man, but by something unseen. 3 days until demolition. Elias couldn't go home. The silence of the empty house was too loud. He checked into a hotel downtown, hoping a change of scenery would stop the dreams. It didn't work. He fell asleep with the TV on, the blue light flickering over the room. The third pattern emerged. The scripture dream. The setting was different. Elias was in a courtroom, but the judge's bench was empty. He was the defendant, but he was also the lawyer. He was arguing his case to an empty room, shouting about permits, profits, and legacy. Suddenly, the back wall of the courtroom dissolved. It became a giant scroll, unrolling from the ceiling. A hand made of fire, began to write on the parchment. Elias couldn't look away. The letters seared into his mind. "For what shall it profit a man, if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" Mark 8:36. The letters began to drip blood. The blood pooled on the floor, rising up to Elias's ankles, then his knees. He tried to move, but he was stuck. He looked down. He wasn't stuck in mud. He was stuck in gold coins. Molten, heavy gold that was hardening around his legs, dragging him down. Elias woke up screaming. The hotel security called up to his room to check on him. He apologized, claiming a nightmare, and hung up. He sat on the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. He knew that verse. His grandmother used to make him memorize it when he was a boy, back when they didn't have money for heating, back when faith was all they had. He hadn't thought about his grandmother Rose in years. She had died before he made his first $1 million. She had always prayed he would build churches, not casinos. He poured a glass of water, his reflection in the mirror looking gaunt. "I'm losing my mind," he muttered. "I need a therapist, or a drink." He reached for the minibar, but his hand froze. A sudden, intense thought dropped into his mind. It wasn't a voice, but it was louder than a thought. Call Sarah, his daughter. She was 7 years old. He hadn't spoken to her since Clara took her away. It was 4:15 a.m. "It's too late," he rationalized. "I'll wake them up." Call Sarah. The command was urgent, a pressure in his chest. This wasn't a dream, but it was connected. It was the waking ripple of the sleeping message. Elias picked up his phone. He dialed Clara's number. It rang once, twice. "Eli?" Clara's voice was frantic, wide awake. "Oh my God, Eli, I was just about to call you." "Clara? What's wrong?" "It's Sophie. She's burning up. She woke up screaming about her stomach. We're in the ambulance. We're going to St. Jude S." The blood drained from Elias's face. "I'm coming." He drove like a madman through the rain-slicked streets. When he arrived at the ER, Clara was in the waiting room, looking small and terrified. She hugged him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the architect. He felt like a terrified father. "Appendix," Clara sobbed. "It burst. They took her straight into surgery. Elias sat there, numb. If he hadn't called, if he had ignored that urge and poured a drink, he wouldn't be here. He would be drunk in a hotel room while his daughter was being cut open. He slumped into the plastic chair, exhausted. He closed his eyes, just for a second. The fourth pattern, the visitation. The hospital waiting room vanished. Elias was standing in a garden. It was peaceful. The air smelled of lavender and old paper. Sitting on a stone bench was an older woman wearing a floral dress and a knitted cardigan. Grandma Rose. She looked exactly as he remembered, but vibrant, healthy. She patted the spot next to her. "Sit down, Eli," she said softly. Elias sat. He wanted to cry. "Grandma, I'm scared." "Sophie, the little one is safe," Rose said, her voice like a warm blanket. "The doctors are guided. But you, Eli, you are in the danger zone." She pointed a finger at him, not in anger, but in fierce love. "You are building a tower on tears, Elias. You think you are the master of the blueprint, but you are sketching on God's canvas. The wolf is at the door." "I can't stop it," Elias pleaded in the dream. "The investors, the contracts, they'll ruin me." Rose leaned in close, her eyes piercing. "Ruin is coming either way, child. You get to choose what kind, the ruin of your pride or the ruin of your soul. Go to the basement, Eli. Look at the stones. The truth is in the stones." "What stones?" "The ones you're trying to hide." Elias woke up to a hand on his shoulder. It was a doctor. "Mr. Thorne." Elias jumped up. "My daughter?" "She's fine." The doctor smiled tiredly. "It was messy, but we got it all. She's in recovery. You can see her in an hour." Elias collapsed back into the chair, tears streaming down his face. The little one is safe. Rose had told him, but the rest of the message burned in his mind. Go to the basement. The truth is in the stones. It was Saturday morning. The site was closed, but Elias knew he had to go. He had to go to the old mission church before the bulldozers arrived on Monday. He had to see what was in the basement. He kissed his sleeping daughter's forehead, told Clara he had to handle an emergency at work, which earned him a look of icy disappointment, and left the hospital. He drove to the construction site. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy grey fog. He unlocked the construction gate and walked towards the condemned church. It was boarded up, marked with red X spray paint. Elias pried open a side door with a crowbar from his trunk. The air inside was stale, smelling of rot and ancient incense. He turned on his flashlight. Go to the basement. He found the stairs behind the altar. They were wooden, rotting. He stepped carefully, descending into the dark. The basement was flooded with about 3 inches of water. Muddy water. Just like the vineyard dream. He waded through it, shining his light on the foundation stones. They were massive, rough-hewn granite. He looked closer. There were cracks, deep structural fissures running through the main load-bearing stones. Marcus was right. The water was eroding the foundation. But then his light caught something else. Tucked into a crevice in the wall, behind a loose stone, was a metal box. It wasn't ancient. It looked like a modern lockbox. Elias pulled the loose stone away. The box fell into the water with a splash. He picked it up. It was locked, but the lock was rusted. He smashed it against the stone wall until it popped open. Inside there were papers, plastic wrapped to stay dry. Elias shone the light on them. They weren't religious texts. They were geological surveys, dated 5 years ago. He read the summary. Site unstable. Major sinkhole risk. Bedrock fractured. Do not build. The survey was signed by Sterling and Finch, his own firm. Elias felt the room spin. Julian. Julian had known. They had done a survey years ago, buried the results, and then hired Elias to fix the site, setting him up as the fall guy if it collapsed. Or worse, they didn't care if it collapsed, as long as the insurance paid out. He was holding the smoking gun. Suddenly, he heard a sound upstairs. Footsteps. Heavy boots on the church floorboards. "Elias?" It was Julian's voice, and it wasn't friendly. "I saw your car, Elias. What are you doing down there?" Elias looked around. There was no other exit. He was trapped in the basement, just like in his first dream. The ceiling of stone sealing him in. He clutched the papers to his chest. The fifth pattern was about to begin, but this time he wasn't asleep. He was living the nightmare. "It's not personal, Eli," Julian said. His silhouette framed the top of the stairs, a dark cutout against the grey light of the church nave. "It's just leverage. You found the leverage." "You knew," Elias shouted, the sound echoing off the wet stone walls. "You knew the ground was unstable. If we build the tower, it'll collapse. People will die, Julian." "People die every day, Elias. Usually poor people. But legends live forever. The apex will be built. And this report," Julian pointed a gloved finger down at the box in Elias's hands, "will disappear. And so will you if you don't hand it over." Elias looked at the papers. This was the smoking gun. If he handed it over, he might keep his job. He might keep his millions. But he would be selling the lives of thousands of people. He remembered the writing on the wall. "What shall it profit a man?" "No," Elias said. The word felt strange in his mouth. He had been a yes man for 20 years. "I'm going to the press." Julian sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "I was afraid of that. You've been acting erratic lately. The stress, the nightmares. Everyone knows you're unstable, Eli. A breakdown was inevitable." Julian stepped back and grabbed the heavy oak door at the top of the stairs. "Julian, wait." "Goodbye, Elias. I'll call the police in a few hours. I'll tell them I found you here, ranting about demons. A tragic, psychotic break." The door slammed shut. The heavy iron deadbolt slid into place with a sound like a gunshot. Elias rushed up the rotting stairs and threw his shoulder against the wood. It didn't budge. He screamed, pounded, and kicked until his shoulder throbbed, but it was useless. He was trapped in a stone box, 40 feet underground. He went back down to the water. The air was getting heavy. He realized with a jolt of terror that the ventilation in the basement was non-existent. And worse, he smelled it again. Sulfur. Not from a dream this time, but from the ground. The fractured bedrock was releasing natural gas. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He sat on a dry patch of stone, his flashlight beam flickering. The batteries were dying. "God," he whispered, "if you're real, don't let me die in the dark." As the oxygen thinned and the gas levels rose, Elias felt his eyelids growing heavy. He couldn't fight it. He slumped against the wall, the flashlight rolling from his hand and going out. Darkness consumed him. The fifth pattern took hold, the attack dream, spiritual warfare. Elias was paralyzed. He was awake, yet he wasn't. He was lying on the basement floor, but the room was filled with shadows that had mass and weight. He tried to lift his arm, but it was pinned by an invisible force. From the corner of the room, the shadows coalesced into a shape. It wasn't the wolf this time. It was a man, wearing a suit identical to his own. The figure stepped into the fading light. It had Elias's face, but the eyes were hollowed out, black pits of nothingness. The figure sat on Elias's chest, crushing the breath out of him. The weight was unbearable. It leaned down, its face inches from Elias's. "You belong to me," the figure hissed. It sounded like the rustle of dry money. "You built me. I am your ambition. I am your pride. You cannot escape your own reflection." Elias tried to scream, but his jaw was locked. "This is how I die," he thought, strangled by my own ghost. The figure's hands wrapped around Elias's throat. The grip was iron. Elias's vision began to spot with red. Then a memory surfaced. Not a memory of architecture or blueprints, but a memory of Sunday school, a tiny mustard seed memory. The name. Elias couldn't speak, but he screamed it in his mind. He screamed it with every ounce of his will. Jesus! The moment he thought the name, the air in the room shattered. A shockwave threw the dark figure off his chest. The paralysis broke. Elias gasped, inhaling deep, jagged breaths in the dream. The dark figure shrieked, a sound of tearing metal, and vanished into the wall. Elias was free, but he was still trapped in the dream, standing in the basement. But the dream didn't end. It shifted. The terror faded, replaced by a hyper-real clarity. The sixth pattern emerged, the directional dream. Elias was still in the basement, but the darkness was gone. The room was illuminated by a soft blue light. He wasn't afraid anymore. He felt a presence standing behind him. He turned, expecting Grandma Rose, but there was no one, just a sense of intelligent instruction. "Look," the presence seemed to say. Elias looked at the wall, the north wall, where the water was seeping in. In the dream, the wall became transparent. He could see through the stone. He saw the mortar between the bricks. It was crumbling. But more importantly, he saw what was behind the wall, about 3 feet of earth, and then a brick tunnel, an old Victorian-era storm drain that ran parallel to the church foundation. The presence guided his eyes to a specific spot. 3 stones up from the floor, 2 stones from the corner. The mortar there was completely dissolved. Use the bar. The thought was placed into his mind. Strike there. Elias looked down at his feet in the dream. The crowbar he had used to pry open the church door was glowing with that same blue light. He reached for it. Strike there, he muttered aloud. Elias woke up. He was back in the pitch black. The gas fumes were strong, making him dizzy. He coughed, his lungs burning. He groped around in the water until his fingers closed around cold steel. The crowbar. He fumbled for his lighter. He didn't smoke, but he kept one for lighting candles at client dinners. He flicked it. A tiny flame illuminated the darkness. He scrambled to the north wall. He counted. 3 stones up, 2 from the corner. It looked solid. In the dim light, it looked just like the rest of the granite. Doubt crept in. It was just a dream, his mind argued. You're hallucinating from the gas. Strike there. The command echoed in his memory. Elias gripped the crowbar. He swung it with all his remaining strength, driving the point into the mortar joint. Crack! The stone didn't chip. It shifted. The mortar crumbled like dry sand. A draft of cool, fresh air hissed through the crack. "Thank you," Elias sobbed. He swung again, and again. Adrenaline flooded his system, overriding the gas poisoning. He pried the heavy stone loose. It fell with a splash. Behind it was dirt, but soft, wet dirt. He dug with his hands, tearing at the earth until his fingers bled. And then his hand broke through into empty space. He widened the hole, pushing his head through. He was looking into a brick tunnel, a storm drain. It was dry. Elias squeezed his body through the opening, dragging the box of evidence with him. He fell onto the brick floor of the storm drain, gasping in the cool, clean air. He was alive. He crawled along the tunnel for what felt like miles, following the faint light at the end. Finally, he emerged through a grate onto the beach, the rain hitting his face. He was covered in mud, blood, and slime, but he had never felt cleaner. He looked up at the cliff above him. The construction site loomed, silent and menacing. "It's over," he whispered. But he was wrong. The battle for his soul was won. But the battle for his life was just starting. Elias didn't go to the police. Not yet. He knew Julian owned half the precinct. Instead, he went to the hospital. He cleaned up in the bathroom, put on the spare clothes Clara had packed for him, and walked into Sophie's room. Clara was asleep in the chair. Sophie was awake, watching cartoons. "Daddy!" she whispered. Elias hugged her, burying his face in her hair. He wept. For 10 minutes, the great architect just held his daughter and cried. When Clara woke up, she saw the change. It wasn't just that he was pale and bruised. It was his eyes. The frantic, hungry look was gone. "Eli?" she asked cautiously. "What happened?" "I woke up," he said. He took her hand. "I'm going to lose my job, Clara. I might get sued. We might lose the house. But I have to stop them." He told her everything. The dreams, the basement, the box. Clara didn't pull away. She squeezed his hand tighter. "Do it." The next morning was Monday. Demolition Day. The site was buzzing. News crews were there to capture the destruction of the old mission church. The mayor was there. Julian stood at the podium, smiling for the cameras, a golden shovel in his hand. "Today," Julian announced, his voice booming over the speakers, "we clear away the decay of the past to build the prosperity of the future." The crowd cheered. The engines of the bulldozers roared to life. Elias stepped out of his car. He walked right past the security guards, who were too stunned by his appearance to stop him. He walked straight onto the stage. "Julian!" Elias's voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Julian's smile faltered. "Elias, what are you doing? You look terrible." He leaned in, whispering, "You survived. Go home, Eli. Don't make a scene." Elias grabbed the microphone. "Stop the machines!" he yelled. The crowd went silent. The bulldozer operators hesitated. "This site is a death trap." Elias held up the plastic-wrapped documents. "This is a geological survey from 5 years ago. It proves the bedrock is fractured. If you build the apex here, it will collapse into the sound within 10 years. Julian lunged for him, but Elias sidestepped. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. "Sterling and Finch hid this," Elias continued, looking directly into the news cameras. "I hid it too. I was part of the lie. But I'm not lying anymore. The ground is cursed. You cannot build on a foundation of deception." Security tackled him then. They dragged him off the stage, but the damage was done. The reporters were already swarming, demanding to see the papers. The police arrived, state police, not the locals Julian owned. In the chaos, Elias looked toward the chain-link fence. Standing there was the old man with the sign, the one who had warned him. "The walls will cry out." The old man wasn't holding a sign today. He was just smiling. He nodded once at Elias, and then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. In the weeks that followed, Elias's life was dismantled. He was fired. He was investigated. He lost his license to practice architecture for 2 years. They had to sell the mansion and the German cars. They moved into a small rental 2 towns over. Elias took a job working for a landscaping crew, digging in the dirt with his hands. But the nightmares stopped. One night, 6 months later, Elias had one final dream. The 7th pattern, the dream of restoration. He was standing on the site of the old mission church. The apex had never been built. The city had turned the land into a park. The sun was rising, painting the sky in gold and violet. In the center of the park stood a new structure. It wasn't a tower. It was a shelter. A beautiful open-air pavilion made of reclaimed wood and stone. It was simple, humble, and strong. Tables were set up underneath it. He saw Clara serving food to the homeless. He saw Sophie playing in the grass. He saw Grandma Rose sitting on a bench, knitting. Elias walked up to the pavilion. He ran his hand over the wood. It was solid, real. He looked down at the drafting table in the dream. The blueprints for this shelter were there, and in the corner, signed in his own handwriting, designed by Elias Thorne, servant of God. A voice spoke from the sky, not thunderous, but like a whisper in the wind. "I have restored the years the locusts have eaten. You have built on the rock. Well done." Elias woke up. The sun was streaming through the cheap blinds of his rental apartment. He could smell coffee brewing. He could hear Sophie laughing in the kitchen. He wasn't a millionaire anymore. He wasn't a legend. But for the first time in his life, Elias Thorne was free. Elias's story is a dramatic example. But the patterns are real. God is speaking to you. He speaks in warnings when you are on the wrong path. He speaks in scriptures when you need truth. He speaks in solutions when you are trapped. And he speaks in restoration when you return to him. Job 33:14 says, "For God speaks in one way, and in two, though man does not perceive it, in a dream, in a vision of the night." Don't be like Elias in the beginning. Don't wait until the walls are falling down to listen. If you are seeing these patterns, recurring themes, warnings, visitations, or intense spiritual warfare, pay attention. Write them down. Pray over them. Your dream could be the blueprint for your deliverance. Have you ever had a dream that felt like a warning, or a solution that came to you in your sleep? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story touched your spirit, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this video with someone who needs to wake up. God bless you and sweet dreams.